The notification sound from my phone cut through the quiet of my cramped studio apartment like a knife. Another Twitch alert. My brother Jake had just received a $500 donation. I stared at the screen, watching him perform his usual theatrics in what used to be my bedroom, the room I'd called home for 17 years until my parents decided his career was more important than their daughter having a place to sleep. 1 year ago, I never would have imagined I'd be living in a 400 square foot apartment above Mrs. Chen's laundromat, working 2 part-time jobs just to afford rent, while watching my younger brother become an overnight sensation from the comfort of my former sanctuary. But here I was, and the bitter taste of betrayal hadn't faded one bit. It started innocently enough. Jake had always been the golden child, star athlete, straight A's, the son my parents bragged about at every neighborhood barbecue. When he expressed interest in gaming and content creation during his senior year, Mom and Dad were thrilled. "He's so entrepreneurial," they'd coo, as if clicking buttons and yelling at a screen was the modern equivalent of starting the next Apple. I was a sophomore in college then, double majoring in computer science and digital media, ironically enough. I'd been creating content myself for years, not gaming videos, but educational tech tutorials that actually helped people learn programming and digital design. My YouTube channel had a modest but engaged following of about 15,000 subscribers. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention, just quality content that made a difference. But that was the problem. It wasn't flashy enough for my parents to notice. When I came home for winter break, I found my room transformed into something resembling a NASA control center. 3 monitors, professional lighting rigs, a soundproof booth, and a gaming chair that probably cost more than my entire semester's textbooks. My bed had been moved to the basement, the unfinished basement with concrete floors and exposed pipes. "It's just temporary, sweetie," Mom had said, not meeting my eyes. "Jake needs the space for his streaming setup, and you're barely home anyway with school." "This is my room," I'd protested, staring at the posters I'd carefully arranged throughout high school now stacked carelessly in a corner. "I grew up here. Where am I supposed to sleep when I visit?" "The basement has that nice pull-out couch," Dad chimed in, his enthusiasm forced. "Think of it as your own private apartment." Private apartment. The basement that flooded every spring and housed our ancient rumbling furnace. The basement where I'd hidden as a child during thunderstorms, where I'd cried after my first heartbreak, where I'd practiced my valedictorian speech until I could recite it perfectly. Now it was supposed to be my private apartment. But I swallowed my pride and made do. After all, it was just for the holidays, right? Jake's streaming thing would probably fizzle out like every other hobby he'd picked up and abandoned. I was wrong. By spring break, Jake had gained 50,000 followers. His gaming clips were going viral on TikTok, and he'd landed a small sponsorship deal with a gaming chair company. My parents were over the moon. "He's making more money than most adults," Dad boasted to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, my educational content was slowly gaining traction. I'd started a series on women in tech that was resonating with viewers, and several companies had reached out about potential partnerships. But when I tried to share this news with my family, their response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey," Mom said absently, focused on helping Jake set up his new merchandise store. "Maybe you can help your brother with his business side of things. He could use someone with your organizational skills." Organizational skills. As if my computer science degree and growing platform were just hobbies to help manage Jake's real career. The final betrayal came during summer break. I arrived home after a grueling semester, exhausted and looking forward to sleeping in my own bed, only to find the basement flooded from a burst pipe. The pull-out couch was ruined, along with several boxes of my personal belongings I'd stored down there. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Mom said, surveying the damage. "The insurance will cover the couch, but you'll have to stay in Jake's room for now." Jake's room? I couldn't hide the incredulity in my voice. You mean my room? That you gave to Jake? Well, he's using it as his studio now. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to stay there with all his equipment. Then where exactly am I supposed to sleep? The uncomfortable silence stretched between us before Dad cleared his throat. We looked into it, and there's a nice extended stay hotel about 20 minutes away. We'll cover the cost, of course. A hotel. They wanted me to stay in a hotel rather than disrupt Jake's streaming schedule. Their own daughter, relegated to a Hampton Inn while their son enjoyed the bedroom I'd grown up in. That night, sitting alone in a sterile hotel room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them anymore, wasn't going to beg for scraps of attention or respect. I was going to succeed so spectacularly that they'd have no choice but to acknowledge what they'd thrown away. I spent the summer working at a tech startup, using my hotel room as a base of operations for creating content. My Women Code 2 series exploded, gaining hundreds of thousands of views. Major tech companies started reaching out, offering partnerships and speaking opportunities. By the end of August, I'd made enough money to rent my own apartment near my university. I didn't tell my parents about the apartment or the success. When they asked about my summer, I kept things vague. Let them assume I was still their struggling student daughter who needed their financial support and approval. The real work began in my senior year. I poured everything into my content creation, using my computer science skills to develop innovative tutorials and tech reviews. My subscriber count grew exponentially. 100,000, 500,000, then over 1 million by graduation. I was invited to speak at conferences, consulted for major software companies, and launched my own online course platform. Meanwhile, Jake's popularity had plateaued. The gaming market was oversaturated, and his content wasn't evolving with the trends. His view counts were dropping, sponsorships were becoming harder to secure, and I could see the panic starting to set in during our family video calls. But still, my parents remained obliviously supportive of their golden boy while barely acknowledging my achievements. When I mentioned landing a keynote speaking slot at TechCrunch Disrupt, Dad's response was, "That's great, honey. Hey, do you think you could help Jake figure out why his livestream keeps cutting out?" The breaking point came 6 months after graduation. I was now living comfortably in a beautiful apartment in Austin, running a 7-figure business, and had just been featured on the cover of Forbes' 30 Under 30 issue. The article called me the educator entrepreneur revolutionizing tech learning. I was expecting congratulations when I called to share the news. Instead, Mom's first question was, "Do you think this could help Jake's channel? Maybe you could mention him in interviews?" That's when I decided it was time for the final phase of my plan. I hired a private investigator, a legitimate service I'd discovered while researching a cybersecurity video. For $500, they could provide a comprehensive report on someone's online presence, financial situation, and public records. Jake's report made for fascinating reading. His streaming income had dropped by 60% over the past year. He'd been rejected by several major gaming organizations, and his merchandise sales had virtually stopped. Most damaging of all, he had been caught using aimbot software during a competitive tournament, leading to his suspension from several gaming platforms. My parents had no idea their golden boy was essentially washed up at 22, but they were about to find out. I planned everything meticulously. First, I arranged for a professional film crew to interview me at my Austin office for a documentary about young entrepreneurs. The timing was perfect. Jake was hosting a comeback stream that evening, desperately trying to rebuild his audience. I made sure my parents knew about both events. "I'll be doing a little interview thing," I mentioned casually during our weekly family call. "Nothing major, just some local filmmakers interested in the tech education space. It's at 7 p.m. Central if you want to tune in." "That sounds lovely, dear," Mom replied distractedly. "We'll try to watch, but Jake has a big stream tonight. He's been working so hard to rebuild his brand after some technical difficulties with his previous setup. Technical difficulties. That's what they were calling his cheating scandal. The interview went perfectly. The documentary crew was professional and engaged, asking thoughtful questions about my journey from basement-dwelling college student to successful entrepreneur. I told my story honestly: the displaced bedroom, the hotel stays, the complete lack of family support, but without bitterness. I let the facts speak for themselves. What would you say to young women who don't feel supported by their families in pursuing tech careers? The interviewer asked. I'd tell them that sometimes the people who should believe in you most will be the last to see your worth, I replied, looking directly into the camera. But that doesn't mean you stop believing in yourself. Success isn't just about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. The interview was streamed live on my social media channels, reaching over 200,000 viewers in real time. My comment section exploded with support from fans who knew pieces of my story, as well as other women sharing similar experiences of family dismissal and gender bias. But the real fireworks started an hour later. Jake's stream was going poorly even before my interview went viral. His viewer count was hovering around 3,000, respectable for most streamers, but a far cry from his peak of 150,000 concurrent viewers. He was playing badly, his commentary was flat, and the chat was filled with references to his cheating scandal. Then someone in the chat posted a link to my interview. "Isn't this your sister?" The message read. "The one who's on the cover of Forbes?" I watched through a screen recording as Jake's face changed, the color draining as he clicked the link and saw my interview. The chat exploded as viewers realized the connection, and within minutes, my story was trending on Twitter with hashtags like Shandir displaced daughter and parents fail. Jake tried to continue streaming, but his heart wasn't in it. The chat was now entirely focused on my interview, with viewers comparing our respective success stories. "Your sister built a $1 million business while you peaked at playing video games," one particularly harsh comment read. He ended the stream after 20 minutes, claiming technical difficulties. My phone started ringing immediately. "Honey, we had no idea about your business," Mom said, her voice strained. "The interview was very enlightening. Why didn't you tell us how successful you'd become?" "I tried," I replied calmly, "multiple times, but you were always too focused on Jake's career to listen." "That's not. We've always been proud of you." "Mom, you made me sleep in a hotel rather than disturb Jake's streaming setup. You asked me to be his assistant instead of celebrating my Forbes cover. You've spent 3 years treating my career like a hobby while elevating his gaming to the level of a Fortune 500 company." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Dad got on the line. "We want to make this right. What can we do?" It was a question I'd been preparing for. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "I wanted your support when it mattered, when I was struggling to build something meaningful. You chose Jake instead. That's your right as parents, but it's also your consequence to live with. Please don't be this way. Family is more important than business success." "You're right," I agreed. "Family should be more important." That's exactly why this hurts so much. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My interview clip was picked up by major news outlets, with headlines like "Parents Kick Daughter Out of Bedroom for Son's Gaming Career. She Responds by Building Tech Empire." The story resonated with millions of people who'd experienced similar family dynamics, and my social media following exploded overnight. Jake's career, meanwhile, imploded. The comparison between our success stories was too stark to ignore, and the gaming community, already skeptical after his cheating scandal, largely abandoned him. His sponsors dropped him, his viewer counts dwindled to double digits, and he was forced to get a regular job at a local electronics store. My parents tried desperately to reconcile with me, offering everything from public apologies to financial support I no longer needed. But the damage was done. Trust, once broken by such fundamental betrayal, couldn't be rebuilt with gestures or words. I didn't gloat about Jake's downfall. There was no satisfaction in watching someone else fail, even someone who'd benefited from my displacement. Instead, I focused on using my platform to help other young women facing similar challenges. I created a scholarship fund for female tech students from unsupportive families and started a mentorship program connecting experienced professionals with emerging talent. The success story had a bittersweet ending. I'd achieved everything I dreamed of and more, but at the cost of my family relationships. My parents and I maintained polite but distant contact, birthday cards and holiday text messages, but none of the warmth that had once defined our interactions. Jake and I never spoke directly about what happened, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd eventually found his footing in a more traditional career, working his way up at a software company. He'd learned valuable skills from his streaming experience: audience engagement, content creation, basic video production, that translated well to marketing roles. In a strange way, his early failure had forced him to develop more sustainable career skills. A year after my interview went viral, I received an unexpected package at my office. Inside was a small framed photo, a picture of Jake and me as kids, building a blanket fort in what used to be my bedroom. On the back, he'd written, "I'm sorry I took your room. I'm sorrier I took your place. Congratulations on building something that actually matters." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Sometimes that's the closest thing to closure you can get. I kept the photo on my desk as a reminder, not of the betrayal or the revenge, but of the sister and brother we used to be before success and failure, favorites and disappointments, drove wedges between us. Maybe someday we'd find our way back to that blanket fort mentality, where we were just two kids building something together instead of competitors for our parents' affection. But until then, I had a business to run, women to mentor, and a future to build on my own terms. The basement might have been cold and unwelcoming, but it had taught me something valuable. Sometimes the only person you can count on to believe in your dreams is yourself, and sometimes that's enough.